Ancient mathematics and philosophy crossed continents without a single email. Centuries before satellites and fiber optic cables, a vast web of intercontinental knowledge highways silently connected the world. Ideas moved at the speed of a camel caravan or a sailing ship, yet they traveled far. Complex astronomy from Babylon surfaced in India. Greek philosophical concepts found echoes in Chinese texts. This was not magic, but a system. By the end of this journey, you will permanently change how you see human history, replacing a map of isolated cultures with a living network of shared thought. We will trace the physical routes from the Silk Roads to the Indian Ocean spice routes and meet the unexpected carriers from empire builders to wandering monks. We will also confront genuine mysteries. How did cultures separated by oceans build such similar pyramids? Why do flood myths appear in nearly every ancient tradition? What does this deep, ancient connectivity mean for us today? Are you ready to see the past not as separate chapters, but as one continuous, global conversation? This outdated image of a world in lonely fragments is precisely what the concept of ancient globalization shatters. We are not looking for asphalt or street signs. The true highways were intangible, a dynamic system of human movement and interaction where ideas were the most valuable freight. Think of it as a vast, living network. Trade caravans carried more than silk and spices. They carried patterns in textiles that told stories. They carried seeds whose cultivation required new knowledge. They carried rumors of distant kings and strange gods. Diplomats and envoys exchanged not just gifts but philosophies. The movement of armies, while a source of hardship, also forcibly relocated artisans, scribes, and engineers, scattering their skills like seeds on the wind. Even the simple act of migration, families seeking new homes, carried entire worldviews across mountains and seas. This constant, churning exchange forms the conceptual bedrock of our story. It transforms history from a series of isolated lanterns glowing in the dark into a web of interconnected signal fires, each one passing the light along. Scholars who map this terrain, like historian Peter Frankopan, argue that these exchanges were not a side effect of history, they were its primary engine. Every major leap in science, in art, in governance, can be traced back to a crossroads where different streams of thought met and mingled. So how did a complex idea actually travel? Sometimes it was encoded in an object. A ceramic pot fired with a new glaze technique is a silent teacher. A bolt of cloth woven with a revolutionary pattern is a textbook without words. Other times it lived in the mind of a single person, a Buddhist monk walking the Silk Road, a Nestorian Christian scholar settling in a Chinese court, a Greek philosopher captured by Persian soldiers. Their knowledge was portable, personal, and profound. And then there were the texts, painstakingly translated across linguistic frontiers, turning a library in Alexandria into a resource for thinkers in Baghdad centuries later. Consider the movement of astronomy from ancient Mesopotamia. Their detailed observations of the stars did not stay put. This data, this structured understanding of the heavens, traveled east to India and west to Greece, becoming a common foundation upon which multiple civilizations built their own cosmic cathedrals. This points to something deeper than mere borrowing. It reveals a shared human impulse, a collective reaching for understanding that transcended any single culture or border. It suggests that the flame of curiosity, once lit, has always sought to spread. And to follow that spreading light, we must now walk the most legendary of these ancient pathways, where the footsteps of merchants and monks still seem to echo. That network of signal fires found its brightest and most enduring trail in the Silk Roads, yet to call them simply roads for silk is to miss their profound purpose. These were the information superhighways of the ancient world, a sprawling web of overland trails linking the imperial courts of China to the bustling ports of the Mediterranean. For over 1,000 years, they pulsed with life, carrying far more than bolts of luxurious fabric. They carried the very architecture of thought. Think of a caravan leaving the city of Chang'an, loaded with silks and lacquerware. Nestled among those physical goods were invisible treasures. Perhaps a Buddhist monk walks alongside the merchants, his mind a living library of sutras and meditative practices from India. His journey would help transplant an entire spiritual tradition into the soil of China and beyond, a process fueled not by conquest, but by peaceful translation and adaptation in oasis towns along the way. In the other direction, technological breakthroughs moved with deliberate speed. The secret of papermaking, one of humanity's most transformative inventions, traveled west from China. It passed through the vibrant intellectual centers of the Islamic world, where it was refined and embraced before finally reaching Europe centuries later. This was not a simple handoff, it was a conversation that changed how the world recorded its history, its laws, and its dreams. The true engines of this exchange were not the lonely trails themselves, but the vibrant oasis cities that dotted them like beacons. Places like Samarkand and Dunhuang were not just pit stops for weary travelers. They were cosmopolitan hubs, buzzing marketplaces of the mind. Here, a Sogdian merchant fluent in half a dozen tongues might broker a deal between a Chinese official and a Persian scholar. A Nestorian Christian might debate theology with a Buddhist monk in a crowded caravanserai, while a mathematician from Baghdad consulted star charts originally drafted in Babylon. These cities were living laboratories of cultural fusion. Nowhere is this fusion more visually stunning than in the art of the Gandhara region, in what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan. Here, a remarkable synthesis occurred. Greek artistic traditions, left behind in the wake of Alexander the Great's campaigns centuries earlier, met the rising tide of Buddhist devotion. The result was a breathtaking new style. For the first time, the Buddha was depicted in human form, and his likeness bore the graceful, realistic proportions and flowing robes of a classical Greek statue. This was not imitation, it was innovation born from connection, a tangible testament to how these routes wove different worlds into something entirely new. The Silk Roads prove that commerce and curiosity were inseparable partners, one funding the journey, the other giving it meaning. But this partnership was not confined to the dust of continents. It also sailed with the monsoon winds upon a vaster, more liquid highway. The monsoon winds did more than fill sails, they charted a course for civilization itself. While the Silk Road snaked across continents, an even more expansive highway pulsed across the Indian Ocean, a liquid network of commerce and culture that turned entire seas into connective tissue. From the bustling ports of the Roman Empire to the spice forests of Southeast Asia and the imperial docks of China, this maritime world was bound together by predictable winds and a shared hunger for discovery. The most famous cargo was, of course, spice. Pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were worth their weight in gold, driving economies and fueling empires. But below decks, in the minds of the sailors and merchants, traveled a far more precious freight. The true commodity was knowledge. To master the Indian Ocean was to master the sky and the sea. Arab and Indian sailors did not merely follow the coast, they pioneered open ocean routes using a deep understanding of seasonal monsoon patterns. This required, and in turn disseminated, advanced astronomical knowledge, star charts, methods for celestial navigation, and complex understandings of wind currents became a shared language among those who braved the deep water. The design of the ships themselves, from the lateen sails of the Arab dhow to the massive multi-masted junks of China, represented a floating exchange of engineering brilliance. These vessels were not just transports, they were melting pots. A single ship might carry a Persian navigator using a Greek-derived astrolabe, a Tamil merchant fluent in half a dozen dialects, and a Buddhist monk from Bengal carrying palm leaf scriptures. The sailors from the Persian Gulf and the powerful Tamil kingdoms of southern India became the unsung diplomats of this age. They were cultural intermediaries, settling in foreign ports, marrying into local families, and facilitating a two-way flow of ideas that went far beyond trade goods. Nowhere is the result of this exchange more breathtakingly visible than on land. The spread of Hinduism and Buddhism across Southeast Asia is a direct legacy of these maritime connections. Think of the awe-inspiring temple complex of Angkor Wat in Cambodia, a monumental representation of Hindu cosmic mythology, or the serene, mandala-like structure of Borobudur in Indonesia, the world's largest Buddhist temple. These were not isolated cultural eruptions. They were the culmination of centuries of contact, where Indian concepts of kingship, architecture, and spirituality sailed east on spice ships and took root in local soil, blending with indigenous traditions to create something magnificently new. This aquatic highway created a string of cosmopolitan port cities from Zanzibar to Gwangju, hubs where a sailor could hear a dozen languages in a single market and find scriptures from 3 different faiths in a dockside warehouse. It was a world of astonishing openness and connection, a testament to what humanity can build when it looks to the horizon. And it was within this interconnected world that a new, deliberate engine of knowledge would ignite, one that would systematically gather the wisdom of the ages and translate it into a powerful new language. While ships navigated by the stars and caravans traced the deserts, a different kind of port was being built, one made of parchment and ink. In the heart of Baghdad, at the peak of the Abbasid Caliphate, a conscious decision was made to map not territories, but the entire known world of thought. The Beit al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, was born. This was not merely a repository for scrolls, it was a colossal engine for translation, a deliberate and state-funded project to construct a new intellectual continent. The caliphs poured vast resources into a singular mission to find, translate, and synthesize everything. Teams of scholars paid by the court gathered texts from the far reaches of the existing knowledge highways. Works in Greek, Persian, Indian, and Syriac languages flowed into the bustling capital. Imagine a room where the geometry of Euclid, the philosophy of Aristotle, the star charts of Ptolemy, and the sophisticated mathematics of the Indian scholar Brahmagupta all lay open on the same table. This was the daily reality of the House of Wisdom. These texts were not just copied, they were actively translated into Arabic, which became the new lingua franca of science. This was a monumental act of preservation. Much of the classical Greek knowledge that we credit today would have been lost to history had it not been for this Arabic translation movement. But the scholars of Baghdad did far more than preserve, they built upon this foundation. By bringing these diverse streams of knowledge into one common language, they enabled a synthesis that sparked breathtaking innovation. The very word algebra comes from the Arabic title of a book by the Persian scholar Al-Khwarizmi, who worked within this tradition. Advanced medical texts like those of Al-Khwarizmi synthesized Greek, Persian, and Indian medicine to create new encyclopedias of healing. Breakthroughs in optics, astronomy, and chemistry followed. This was the ultimate upgrade to the knowledge highway, a centralized hub where the world's intellectual traffic was not just allowed to pass, but was actively rerouted, decoded, and amplified. It demonstrates a profound historical truth that when political power aligns with intellectual curiosity and invests in infrastructure for the mind, the pace of human understanding can leap forward. The legacy of this great translation movement, however, was not destined to stay in one place. The common scientific language it created and the vast library of thought it compiled would itself become the most valuable cargo on the next leg of the journey, seeking a new shore where it would ignite another renaissance. The knowledge gathered in Baghdad would eventually find its way back to the shores of another ancient sea, one that had long served as its own vibrant crossroads. The Mediterranean was never just a body of water. It was a liquid forum where philosophies were traded as actively as olive oil or marble. For centuries, its waves connected the wisdom of pharaonic Egypt, the inquisitive city-states of Greece, the mercantile prowess of Phoenicia, and the administrative might of Rome. Here, ideas did not simply travel, they engaged in sustained conversation, building a shared foundation of thought that would shape continents. At the heart of this exchange was Greek philosophy, a system born from debate in Athenian agoras. But its influence truly multiplied when it was adopted and adapted by the Romans. Think of it not as a theft, but as a translation into a new key. Roman thinkers like Cicero took the complex ethical frameworks of Stoicism, with its focus on virtue and resilience in the face of hardship, and reframed them into practical guides for civic duty and personal conduct. This adapted philosophy then flowed along the stone-paved roads of the empire from Britain to Syria, becoming a common intellectual currency for administrators and citizens alike. This fusion reached its most ambitious physical form in the city of Alexandria. Its legendary library was more than a building. It was a statement of intent, an attempt to anchor the entire Mediterranean's swirling knowledge into one universal archive. Scholars were invited from across the known world to copy, translate, and debate texts, creating a model of concentrated learning that the House of Wisdom in Baghdad would consciously emulate centuries later. The most enduring export of this Mediterranean fusion, however, was not a philosophy but a system. Roman law, meticulously developed over centuries, was deeply infused with the Greek concept of natural law, the Stoic idea that certain just principles are inherent in the universe and accessible to human reason. This belief that law should be logical, consistent, and based on equitable principles rather than just the whims of power became the empire's great institutional legacy. It provided a template that would be studied, revived, and woven into legal systems across Europe and beyond, forming a hidden backbone of modern justice. This shared foundation was built by constant movement. The earlier maritime networks of the Phoenicians and Greeks were not merely about establishing trade outposts, they planted seeds of cultural hybridity. A Greek colony in southern Italy or a Phoenician port in North Africa became a living laboratory, where local traditions blended with imported gods, artistic styles, and ways of thinking. This centuries-long simmer of interaction created what we might call a common philosophical vocabulary for the Western world, a set of shared reference points about governance, ethics, and the nature of reality. Yet this very vocabulary was not a closed system. It was about to be profoundly challenged and enriched as the knowledge highways from the East, carrying the synthesized treasures of Baghdad and the spiritual insights of Asia, finally converged with this Mediterranean legacy, setting the stage for a world-altering collision and fusion of thought. A stable empire was more than just a political entity, it was the ultimate infrastructure project for the mind. Across history, the great surges in cross-cultural exchange did not happen in times of fractured chaos, but under the vast protective umbrella of imperial peace. Two such periods stand as monumental bookends, the Pax Romana of the ancient world and the Pax Mongolica of the medieval era. Their names share that powerful Latin word, pax, meaning peace, but this was not merely an absence of conflict. It was an active, enforced condition that transformed geography. Imagine trying to send a fragile manuscript or a lone scholar on a 6,000-mile journey through a patchwork of warring tribes and bandit-ridden passes. The risk would be overwhelming, but when a single, powerful authority could guarantee security along those same routes, the impossible suddenly became routine. The Roman Empire did this by clearing the Mediterranean of pirates and paving roads that stretched from the damp mists of Britain to the sun-baked sands of Syria. They standardized currency, so a merchant in Gaul and a trader in Alexandria could do business with the same coins. This created a safe, predictable corridor that allowed not just legions to march, but ideas to stroll from the philosophical schools of Greece directly into the heart of Roman law and literature. Centuries later, on the other side of the world, the Mongol Empire achieved something even more breathtaking in scale. The so-called Pax Mongolica stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Vienna, a territory of staggering diversity united under a single, if stern, rule. The Mongol Khans were ruthless conquerors, but they were brilliant administrators. They standardized trade regulations, punished banditry with severe efficiency, and established a system of way stations, the yam, that functioned as a continental postal and travel service. For the first and only time in history, one could travel the entire length of the Silk Roads under a single political guarantee of safe passage. This is how a Venetian merchant like Marco Polo could journey from Italy to the court of Kublai Khan in China, and how a Nestorian monk like Rabban Bar Soma could make the reverse trip from Beijing to Paris, delivering letters from the Ilkhan of Persia to the kings of Europe. These were not just adventures, they were symptoms of a world made suddenly, astonishingly small by imperial design. But empires did more than police the roads, they actively curated the traffic. Imperial courts became dazzling hubs of patronage, deliberately assembling the best minds from across their domains. The Mongol Ilkhanate court in Persia, for instance, was a veritable think tank. Here, Chinese astronomers brought their precise celestial maps. Islamic scholars contributed their advanced mathematics and medical texts, and even European thinkers like the Venetian translator were drawn into the conversation. The result was collaborative works like the Ilkhanid star charts, which synthesized Persian, Arabic, and Chinese observational data to create some of the most accurate astronomical models of the age. This was knowledge diplomacy, where the ruler's power was magnified by the intellectual prestige of his court. These periods of enforced peace created temporary but potent zones of intellectual freedom, rare windows in time when a scholar's origin mattered less than the insight he could provide. They demonstrate a profound and often overlooked historical principle that the fierce concentration of political power, for all its potential for hardship, could be harnessed as a formidable engine for global dialogue. It provided the stable stage upon which the quiet, persistent actors of exchange, the translators, the monks, and the merchants, could perform their world-changing work. The true resilience of this global conversation often lay not with kings or caravans, but with those who walked the margins. While empires built the grand highways, the most adaptable threads in the network were spun by nomads, pilgrims, and those displaced by hardship. Their journeys, driven by faith, survival, or seasonal rhythm, created a grassroots web of exchange that was often invisible to history, yet astonishingly durable. Consider the vast Eurasian steppe, a sea of grass that many maps once labeled empty. It was anything but. Nomadic confederations like the Scythians, and later the Turks and Mongols before their great conquests, were the ultimate mobile communities. Their entire existence was defined by movement across immense distances. They were not merely passing through cultures, they were living intersections. As they migrated, they absorbed and transmitted art styles, metallurgical techniques, and linguistic elements. The stunning golden animal art of the Scythians, for instance, found echoes in the artifacts of distant settled civilizations, carried not by trade treaty, but by the slow, persistent drift of peoples and their portable belongings. They were living, breathing conduits, stitching the fringes of empires together with threads of shared custom and technology. A different kind of migration was fueled by faith. Every year for centuries, a silent river of believers has flowed toward sacred centers. The Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, draws people from across the Islamic world, from West Africa to Indonesia. In the ancient and medieval world, a Buddhist pilgrim from China, like the famous monk Xuanzang, would spend years traveling to the holy sites of India. Christians journeyed to Jerusalem. These were not sightseeing trips, they were profound acts of devotion that doubled as monumental knowledge exchanges. Pilgrims carried scriptures, but also the living interpretations of those texts. They shared stories, debated theology in crowded hostels, and observed different ways of life in every town they passed. When they returned home, they didn't just bring back spiritual merit, they brought back new philosophical concepts, medical remedies overheard, and accounts of foreign lands that expanded the mental map of their entire community. A single pilgrim could become a one-person university, disseminating ideas far from any royal library or official envoy. Then there is the most poignant vector of all, the movement of people fleeing conflict or persecution. The dispersal of communities like the Nestorian Christians is a powerful example. Facing pressure in the Byzantine Empire, many moved eastward along the Silk Roads into Persia, Central Asia, and eventually China. They did not travel empty-handed. They carried their entire intellectual tradition with them, their theology, their knowledge of Greek philosophy and science, and their skills in medicine and languages. In their new homes, they often became valued translators, advisors, and scholars, injecting a stream of Mediterranean and Middle Eastern thought directly into the heart of Asia. This movement of people under duress underscores a profound and often overlooked truth, that ideas are inseparable from the people who hold them. When humans move, their world moves with them, settling in new soil and taking root in unexpected ways. These unsung carriers operated outside formal channels, making their network organic, adaptable, and incredibly resilient. When an empire fell and its grand roads fell into disrepair, the pilgrim still walked his path, the nomadic tribe still followed its seasonal route, the displaced community still sought a new home. Their journeys remind us that the most powerful infrastructure for ideas is not made of stone or policy, but of human footsteps and the enduring need to connect, to understand, and to find meaning beyond the horizon. And sometimes the most compelling evidence for this deep connectivity isn't found in texts or trade ledgers, but etched into the very stones of monuments separated by oceans, posing a silent, monumental question to the modern world. The most compelling evidence for ancient connection is often written in stone, not on parchment. Scattered across the globe, from the sands of Giza to the jungles of Guatemala, stand structures that share an uncanny, silent language, the pyramid. In Egypt, in Mesopotamia, and in the distant civilizations of Mesoamerica, human hands, separated by oceans and millennia, chose the same fundamental shape to touch the heavens. This is not a trivial coincidence. It is one of history's most profound architectural mysteries, and it forces us to ask a difficult question. Were these cultures truly independent, or were they connected by threads now lost to time? The simplest explanation is one of convergent engineering. The pyramid is fundamentally a brilliantly stable form. A wide base and a narrowing top is the most logical way to build something incredibly tall and enduring with simple tools. It is a mountain made by human hands, a statement of permanence and power that any emerging civilization might naturally arrive at. Furthermore, the shape has a powerful symbolic gravity. Its sides, often aligned with the cardinal directions, connect the structure to the cosmic order, to the path of the sun, and to the stars. In both Egypt and the Americas, pyramids served as stairways or bridges between the earth and the realm of the gods, a physical manifestation of a shared human desire to reach beyond our mortal plane. This shared impulse can explain the general form, but the devil, as they say, is in the astonishing details. When we look closer, the parallels become deeply thought-provoking. The Great Pyramid of Giza is precisely aligned to true north with an accuracy that still baffles engineers. Thousands of miles away, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan in Mexico is aligned with similar, deliberate precision, its western face set to mark the sun's setting on key ceremonial dates. Both cultures embedded complex mathematics and astronomical knowledge into their foundations. They used these structures not just as tombs or temples, but as colossal calendars and observatories, anchoring their understanding of time and space in geometry and stone. The religious purpose, too, echoes across the continents. These were not merely buildings, they were central to the community's relationship with the cosmos, often involving rituals tied to agricultural cycles and celestial events. This depth of shared purpose goes beyond simple practicality. So, does this point to direct contact? Mainstream scholarship remains cautious, and for good reason. There is no archaeological evidence, like an Egyptian artifact in a Mayan tomb, to prove a direct link. The timeline is also vast, with thousands of years separating the pyramid ages of these regions. This leads many experts to champion the theory of independent invention, a testament to universal human genius solving similar problems in similar ways. Yet, the possibility of a more ancient, indirect connection is a tantalizing thread we cannot fully cut. Could a core concept, a seed idea of the sacred mountain temple, have been carried across the world in the deep, misty epochs of prehistory? We now know that human migration across the oceans happened far earlier and more frequently than once believed. Could a now vanished seafaring culture, their own story erased by rising seas or shifting sands, have carried a mythological blueprint from one continent to another, a story of a stairway to the stars that then took root and evolved independently in isolation? This is not about aliens or lost super-civilizations, but about the slow, patient diffusion of a powerful idea along prehistoric knowledge highways we are only beginning to map. The pyramid enigma sits perfectly at the crossroads of our exploration. It represents both the undeniable power of the shared human mind to arrive at elegant solutions and the haunting possibility of forgotten conversations across impossible distances. Whether a case of magnificent convergence or a whisper from a lost global past, these stone giants remind us that the ancient world might have been far more conversant than our history books have long assumed. And if such a fundamental architectural concept could potentially travel, what about something even more pervasive like a story so primal it seems woven into the very fabric of human memory? A story older than writing itself echoes across every inhabited continent. It is a tale of rising waters, of a world cleansed or punished, and of a single family or a chosen few surviving in a great vessel. From the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical account of Noah, from the Hindu Puranas describing Manu's fish-guided boat to the flood legends of the Maya and the indigenous peoples of Australia, this narrative is a hauntingly constant refrain in the symphony of human mythology. Its pervasive presence presents our second great mystery. Is this a fossilized memory of a real, global catastrophe, or does it point to something even deeper within the human psyche? The geological record offers a compelling clue. The end of the last ice age, roughly 12,000 years ago, was not a gentle transition. As vast continental glaciers melted, global sea levels rose by over 100 meters, drowning coastlines and swallowing entire landmasses that once connected continents. The inundation of places like Doggerland, a fertile plain between Britain and Europe, or the Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia, would have been a slow-motion apocalypse for the communities living there, an unstoppable advance of the ocean witnessed over generations. Furthermore, many regions experienced catastrophic local floods, such as the possible bursting of glacial lakes in North America or the flooding of the Black Sea Basin, events so traumatic they could have seeded legends that grew to encompass the entire world in the telling. This suggests the flood myth could be a collective cultural scar, a shared memory of a profound environmental shift so disruptive it became woven into the foundational stories of scattered descendant populations. The timeline is crucial. These post-glacial floods occurred at a time when humanity was pre-literate, relying entirely on oral tradition to preserve its history. A detailed account of a real event could be transmitted with remarkable accuracy across hundreds of generations through rigorous storytelling rituals, becoming a core part of a people's identity. As those early human groups migrated, they would have carried this foundational story with them, like a precious seed in their cultural baggage, planting it in new lands where it would adapt to local landscapes and gods, yet retain its essential plot. This theory frames the global flood not as a single event, but as a mosaic of traumatic experiences with a common cause, remembered and retold along the very first knowledge highways, the paths of human migration themselves. Yet another perspective looks inward to the realm of archetypes. The great Swiss psychologist Carl Jung proposed that humanity shares a collective unconscious, a deep well of symbolic patterns and primordial images common to all people. In this view, water is a near-universal symbol of the unconscious, of chaos, and of potential. A great flood, then, could represent a psychological truth, the overwhelming power of chaotic forces that must be navigated for renewal to occur. The ark becomes a symbol of the conscious self or the enduring cultural spirit, preserving what is essential through a tumultuous transformation. From this angle, the story's persistence isn't about historical fact, but about a shared human understanding of cyclical destruction and rebirth, of moral reckoning, and of resilience. These two explanations are not mutually exclusive. A real, widespread geological trauma could have provided the raw material, which was then shaped over millennia by the universal symbolic tools of the human mind into the powerful myths we recognize today. Whether as a distorted memory of lost continents or as a profound metaphor for spiritual cleansing, the global flood narrative demonstrates the incredible stamina of story. It shows that long before libraries were built, knowledge, warning, and meaning could travel thousands of miles and last for thousands of years, carried on the breath of storytellers around countless fires. This deep time transmission hints that the earliest human networks were not trading spices or philosophies, but the very myths that explained their world and their place within it, a foundational layer of our ancient connectedness. From the depths of the sea came a ghost, a corroded bronze machine that should not have existed. In the year 1901, sponge divers off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera discovered a Roman-era shipwreck, a treasure trove of statues and artifacts. Among the marble and clay, they found a lump of encrusted metal that seemed unremarkable. Decades later, painstaking cleaning and modern imaging revealed the truth. This was not a simple ornament. It was a clockwork universe, a device of at least 30 intricate bronze gears, housed in a wooden case no larger than a shoebox. We now call it the Antikythera Mechanism, and it is the single most mind-bending artifact ever recovered from the ancient world. This was a computer built in the 2nd century before the Common Era, designed to calculate the movements of the cosmos with stunning precision. Turn a hand crank on the side and dials would spin, pointers would move, and a tiny mechanical ballet would predict the positions of the sun and moon, the phases of the lunar cycle, and even the timing of eclipses years in advance. It could track the irregular orbit of the moon, a complex motion known as lunar anomaly, and it likely displayed the dates of major athletic games like the Olympics. This was not magic, it was applied science of the highest order. Its very existence shatters our timeline of technological progress. We thought such geared complexity did not appear again until the astronomical clocks of medieval Europe over 1,000 years later. So where did this knowledge come from? The mechanism is a physical crossroads. Its astronomical calculations are based on cycles perfected by Babylonian sky watchers centuries earlier. Its engineering brilliance, however, speaks to the hands of Greek craftsmen in the tradition of geniuses like Archimedes. Some researchers suggest it may have been built in the intellectual powerhouse of Rhodes or in the storied city of Syracuse. It is a fusion device taking refined data from one ancient highway of knowledge and embedding it into a mechanical masterpiece born from another. This was not a one-off curiosity. Writings from the time, like those of Cicero, describe similar devices being brought to Rome from Sicily. The Antikythera Mechanism was likely not unique, but perhaps one of the finest examples of a known craft, a luxury item for a wealthy philosopher or a teaching tool in a great library. Its discovery forces a humbling realization. The Hellenistic world of the Mediterranean, in the centuries after Alexander the Great, achieved a peak of mechanical and astronomical understanding that was largely erased by the passage of time. The wars, the fires that consumed libraries, and the simple decay of materials meant that this branch of high technology, this path of building intricate models of the heavens, faded into obscurity. The mechanism is a message in a bottle, washed ashore 2 millennia late. It tells us that the ancient knowledge highways carried not just ideas, but extraordinarily sophisticated applications of those ideas. It prompts a haunting question. This one device survived only by resting in the silent, preserving darkness of the seafloor. How many other ships, carrying how many other wonders of crafted intellect, sank into the deep and were lost forever? What other chapters of human ingenuity are missing from our story, their pages dissolved by salt water or turned to dust? The ghost from Antikythera is a testament not just to what was achieved, but to the profound fragility of our shared technological heritage. It is a whisper from a past far more clever than we ever imagined. Gold was not the only treasure sought along these ancient routes. In the shadowy workshops and quiet libraries of the ancient world, a more elusive pursuit flickered to life, the dream of alchemy. From the laboratories of Taoist China to the courts of medieval Europe, the same tantalizing goals emerged: to perfect base matter into gold and to discover an elixir granting eternal youth. This was not merely a quest for wealth or longevity. It was a profound philosophical investigation into the very nature of reality itself, and its simultaneous appearance across continents presents our fourth great mystery. Did these ideas spring up independently, or was the secret fire of alchemy itself a substance that traveled the knowledge highways? The evidence points to a fascinating diffusion. At its core, alchemy was a universal language of transformation. It operated on a shared belief that all matter was alive and striving toward a state of perfection. In China, this was deeply entwined with Taoist practices, where the quest for the elixir of life was also a spiritual journey of internal alchemy, refining the self to achieve harmony with the Tao. Chinese alchemists experimented with mercury and cinnabar, seeking physical and spiritual transmutation. Their sophisticated chemical knowledge and theories of complementary forces, yin and yang, did not stay isolated. Through the relentless traffic of the Silk Roads, these concepts likely traveled west. Historians trace a compelling pathway. By the 8th century, the vibrant intellectual culture of the Islamic world, particularly in Baghdad, was actively translating texts from Greek, Persian, and possibly even Chinese sources. It is here we meet a pivotal figure, Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in the West as Geber. His vast body of work, while shrouded in later editions, systematized alchemical theory for the Arabic-speaking world. He emphasized the fundamental roles of mercury and sulfur as the parents of all metals, a concept that bears a striking resemblance to earlier Chinese principles. While direct proof is elusive, the timing and the trade routes make the transmission of these core ideas not just possible but probable. Knowledge of Chinese practices could have filtered into the Islamic world through Persian intermediaries or along the bustling maritime spice routes, where ports like Guangzhou were hubs of multicultural exchange. The Islamic alchemists then acted as a crucial bridge. They preserved, expanded, and codified this inherited wisdom, blending it with Greek philosophy from figures like Aristotle. Their translated and original texts eventually made their way into medieval Europe, often through the scholarly gateway of Islamic Spain. There, the quest was reborn, now seeking the legendary philosopher's stone. This journey reveals something profound about the nature of ancient connectivity. It was not just finished goods or settled science that traveled. Speculative philosophy, experimental practice, and mystical yearning flowed along the same channels as silk and pepper. A merchant might carry a bolt of cloth, but a traveling monk or physician in his caravan could carry a formula for a tincture or a theory about the soul of metals. Alchemy demonstrates the transfer of an entire worldview, a way of seeing the universe as a dynamic, transformable entity. This was a package deal of material technique and spiritual aspiration, moving as one inseparable unit across continents. The shared focus on substances like mercury and sulfur across these traditions is less a smoking gun of direct contact and more a signpost of deep conceptual exchange. It suggests that the great networks did not merely transport objects, they facilitated the blending of entire systems of thought, creating a shared, global laboratory of the human imagination. From this cauldron of mixed traditions, where mystical speculation met hands-on experiment, a new and more systematic way of interrogating nature would slowly, centuries later, begin to crystallize. Herodotus, the great Greek historian, once recorded a story that seemed too incredible to be true. He wrote that in the 6th century before the Common Era, the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II commissioned a crew of Phoenician sailors to attempt a voyage of unimaginable ambition to sail around the entire continent of Africa. According to the tale, these mariners set out from the Red Sea, sailed south, and after many months witnessed the sun on their right hand, to the north, a detail that would only make sense if they had crossed the equator and were rounding the southern tip of Africa. They eventually returned to Egypt through the Pillars of Hercules, what we call the Strait of Gibraltar, completing a full circumnavigation in 3 years. For centuries, modern scholars dismissed this as a fanciful legend. Yet, when we examine who the Phoenicians were, that dismissal begins to feel premature. This civilization, based in the coastal cities of modern-day Lebanon, were the undisputed masters of the ancient Mediterranean. They were not empire builders in the traditional sense, they were network builders. Their ships, powered by both sail and oar, were the most advanced of their age. They established trading colonies from Carthage in North Africa to Cadiz in Spain, and their primary currency was not just purple dye and glass, but information. They were the couriers of the Bronze and Iron Age Mediterranean, fluent in the languages and customs of every port. Their reach for resources was relentless. We have solid archaeological evidence that they sailed as far as Cornwall in Britain to secure tin, a vital component for making bronze. This was not coastal hopping. This was open water navigation across the treacherous Bay of Biscay, a testament to their extraordinary seafaring confidence. If they could routinely make that journey, the question becomes not if they were capable of longer voyages, but how far their courage and curiosity might have pushed them. This brings us to the fifth and most speculative mystery, the hypothesis that Phoenician vessels may have ventured far beyond the mapped world, possibly even reaching the shores of the Americas. The evidence here is contentious, a scattering of ambiguous clues that mainstream archaeology views with deep skepticism. There are controversial inscriptions like the Parariba inscription from Brazil, which was likely a modern hoax. There are accounts of seemingly out-of-place artifacts, though these are often poorly documented. The most compelling argument is not based on a single artifact, but on capability and motive. The Phoenicians possessed the ships, the navigational skills using stars and currents. and the proven willingness to undertake multi-year voyages for trade and exploration. We know that after the fall of their homeland, Phoenician sailors from Carthage continued pushing boundaries. A text known as the Periplus of Hanno describes a Carthaginian expedition down the west coast of Africa, encountering gorillas and volcanic mountains. If they sailed that far south, could a storm have blown a ship hopelessly off course into the Atlantic currents that flowed directly toward the Caribbean? It is within the realm of physical possibility. The more profound implication of this hypothesis is not about proving a permanent colony, but about the potential for episodic, lost contact. Imagine a single Phoenician ship, battered and off course, making landfall on a new continent. The crew would have interacted with local peoples, exchanged goods, and perhaps shared stories before repairing their ship and attempting the long journey home, a journey they may or may not have survived. Such an event would have created a fleeting, direct knowledge highway between the old world and the new, a thread that snapped almost as soon as it was spun. Any cultural or technological seeds planted in that brief encounter would have been left to grow or wither in complete isolation, leaving behind an archaeological signature virtually impossible to find. This is why the Phoenician hypothesis is so challenging and important. It forces us to confront the limits of our own historical imagination. Our standard model of ancient history is built on evidence that survived, on cities that endured, on texts that were copied and preserved. It struggles to account for the lone voyage, the chance meeting, the story told once around a fire and then forgotten. The possibility of such journeys suggests that the web of ancient connectivity might have had threads that stretched much farther than our maps show, threads that were fragile, temporary, and ultimately broken by the vastness of the oceans. Whether they rounded Africa or crossed the Atlantic, the Phoenicians embody the ultimate ancient explorers, reminding us that the human drive to see what lies beyond the horizon has always been one of the most powerful forces shaping our shared story. A silent conversation requires a shared vocabulary. For the grand dialogue of ancient civilizations to function, a common linguistic medium was as vital as the roads and sea lanes themselves. Across different regions and eras, specific languages rose to become the operating system of their respective networks. The lingua franca that allowed a Greek merchant to bargain with an Egyptian official, or a Chinese monk to study Indian scriptures. In the bustling markets of the Near East for centuries, that language was Aramaic, originally the tongue of a nomadic people from Syria. Its simple alphabet and adaptability made it the administrative and commercial language of the Assyrian, Babylonian, and later Persian empires. Its reach was so profound that it became the everyday speech of communities from the borders of India to the Nile Delta, a unifying thread in a tapestry of local dialects. Following the conquests of Alexander the Great, a new common tongue emerged, Greek Koine. This simplified, common version of Greek became the language of government, high culture, and commerce across the entire Hellenistic world, from the palaces of the Seleucids in Persia to the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. It was the language in which the New Testament would later be written, ensuring its ideas could spread rapidly through the Eastern Mediterranean. Meanwhile, in South and Southeast Asia, Sanskrit played a similar, though more culturally specific role. As the sacred language of Hinduism and a primary vehicle for Buddhist philosophy, it traveled not through imperial decree but through religious and literary prestige. Courts in Java and Cambodia adopted Sanskrit for inscriptions and royal ceremonies, using its sophisticated vocabulary to articulate concepts of kingship and cosmic order, weaving a thread of high culture across the Indian Ocean world. Later, as we saw with the House of Wisdom, Arabic would become the new scientific lingua franca, a linguistic vessel purpose-built to carry the translated wisdom of the ages. But these languages did not spread by themselves. They were carried and given life by a specialized, often overlooked profession, the translator-scholar. These individuals were the human routers of the ancient information network. Consider the Sogdian merchants of Central Asia. Hailing from the vibrant oasis cities along the Silk Road, they were famed not just for their commercial acumen but for their linguistic prowess. A Sogdian trader often acted as diplomat and interpreter, fluent in Chinese, Persian, Turkic dialects, and more. They were the essential middleware, the living software that allowed the hardware of the trade routes to process complex transactions of both goods and ideas. Their role went far beyond simple word-for-word substitution. The act of translation in the ancient world was a profound intellectual and creative endeavor. When a Buddhist sutra written in Sanskrit was translated into Chinese, the translator faced a monumental task. Chinese and Sanskrit belong to completely different language families, with different grammars, sounds, and philosophical underpinnings. A translator had to find Chinese characters that could approximate the subtle, often untranslatable concepts of Indian metaphysics. This required deep interpretation, cultural adaptation, and sometimes the invention of entirely new terms. In this process, the idea itself could be subtly reshaped, taking on nuances from the target culture. A Greek philosophical concept rendered into Arabic might gain layers of meaning from Islamic theology, just as an Indian mathematical principle explained in Persian might be visualized through a new metaphorical lens. This was not a loss of purity, but a gain in richness. Translation was an act of co-creation. Each major translation project, like the rendering of Greek works into Arabic or Sanskrit texts into Chinese, did not just transmit knowledge, it fertilized it. The translated idea, now clothed in a new linguistic garment, could interact with local traditions in unexpected ways, sparking innovations that neither the source nor the receiving culture could have produced alone. This linguistic layer was the invisible, essential infrastructure. Without the lingua franca to provide a common ground, and without the translator-scholar to build bridges across it, the most brilliant ideas would have remained trapped in their places of origin, brilliant but isolated lanterns. It was this soft, human network of shared words and dedicated minds that truly animated the stone roads and wooden ships, turning physical pathways into conduits for the world's most precious cargo, understanding itself. To navigate the world, they first had to draw its soul. Ancient maps were never just practical guides from point A to point B. They were profound philosophical statements, dense with meaning about humanity's place in the cosmos. A Babylonian clay tablet from around 600 years before the Common Era presents the world not as we see it, but as they understood it. At its center lies Babylon, enclosed by a circular ocean, with distant lands depicted as triangular shapes beyond the water. This was less a geographical tool and more a cosmological diagram, illustrating a universe ordered around their own civilization, surrounded by the chaotic unknown. It was a map of ideology as much as territory. Across the world during China's Han Dynasty, court cartographers produced maps of astonishing administrative detail. These silk or paper scrolls emphasized rivers, mountains, and most importantly, the boundaries of commanderies and counties. Their primary purpose was control, to manage tax collection, resource allocation, and the movement of imperial troops. The Chinese world, you often placed their middle kingdom at the center of a tributary system, with other lands radiating outward in levels of cultural and political influence. This was a map of power and hierarchy. Then there was the revolutionary approach of the Greco-Roman world, culminating in the work of Claudius Ptolemy in the 2nd century. His geography was a staggering synthesis. He pulled from Greek geometry, Roman survey data, and Persian travel accounts to propose a system of longitude and latitude, a grid to mathematically pin down any location on a spherical Earth. His work contained errors that would later constrain exploration, like underestimating the planet's circumference and enclosing the Indian Ocean with a southern landmass, but his methodology was transformative. He offered a coordinate-based model of the world, one that could, in theory, be tested, corrected, and expanded. This was a map as a scientific hypothesis. The journey of these cartographic ideas is a perfect case study in how knowledge highways functioned. Ptolemy's Greek text did not dominate Europe immediately after his death. Instead, it was preserved, translated into Arabic, and refined by Islamic scholars in Baghdad and elsewhere, who added their own observations from Arab traders sailing the Indian Ocean. Centuries later, this enriched version was translated from Arabic into Latin, flowing back into a Europe that had largely forgotten its own classical heritage. When European explorers like Columbus set sail, they were guided by maps deeply indebted to this filtered, hybrid tradition. The exchange often happened in the most direct ways imaginable. When a library was captured or a scholar was invited to a foreign court, their maps and star charts became prized intelligence. A Chinese map captured by Mongol forces could inform Persian geographers. A Greek atlas preserved in Alexandria could be studied by an Arab mathematician. Each time, the receiving culture didn't just copy, they interpreted. They might redraw the coastlines based on their own sailors' reports, or re-center the entire map to reflect their own capital's prominence. This process literally expanded the mental space for connection. Seeing a distant land represented on a credible map made it feel less like a monster-filled legend and more like a potential destination for a caravan or a ship. It turned the blank spaces on the edge of the known world from realms of pure myth into territories of potential trade and dialogue. The contrast is revealing: the Greco-Roman pursuit of an objective, geometric framework versus the Chinese focus on an administrative and hierarchical landscape. Both were brilliant, both served their society's needs, and both were products of their unique philosophical soil. Yet, when these different cartographic traditions eventually met, through the slow osmosis of exchange, they offered complementary tools, one for plotting a course across open seas, the other for governing the complex human terrain at the journey's end. Mapping the world was the ultimate act of intellectual synthesis, taking rumors, merchant logs, astronomical readings, and imperial surveys, and weaving them into a single image that could fit on a clay tablet, a silk scroll, or a parchment codex. It made the vast, terrifying unknown suddenly seem finite, knowable, and connectable. The most tangible cargo on these ancient routes was often alive. Beyond silks and philosophies, the knowledge highways pulsed with a biological current, carrying seeds, saplings, and animals that would irrevocably reshape continents. This was a silent, green revolution, where the transfer of flora and fauna embedded a vast library of practical wisdom into the very soil of new lands. Consider the humble grain of wheat, first domesticated in the Fertile Crescent. Its journey eastward along the Silk Roads was not just a shipment of food, it was the delivery of an entire agricultural system. With the wheat came the knowledge of when to sow it, how to irrigate it, and how to process it into flour. Grapes and cotton traveled a similar path from west to east, bringing with them the arts of viticulture and textile production. In the opposite direction, a bounty of flavor and medicine flowed westward. Citrus fruits from Southeast Asia, peaches from China, and the crucial technology of sugar cultivation from India and Persia transformed diets, economies, and even social rituals in the Mediterranean and beyond. Each successful transplant required the migration of deep, hands-on understanding. A merchant might carry peach stones, but the survival of those stones into fruit-bearing trees depended on the accompanying knowledge of grafting, pruning, and soil preparation, likely carried in the mind of a gardener traveling with the caravan. This exchange carried profound medicinal knowledge as well. The use of plants like ginger or ginseng for wellness traveled with the plants themselves, blending local herbal traditions into a cross-continental pharmacy. But perhaps no single biological transfer had a more dramatic impact than the horse. Originally domesticated on the Eurasian steppes, the horse was introduced to the great settled civilizations of China, Persia, and the Mediterranean. This was not merely the arrival of a new animal, it was the arrival of a new dimension of speed and power. The horse transformed the very fabric of society. It revolutionized warfare, creating mobile cavalry units that could dominate battlefields. It supercharged trade, allowing caravans to cover greater distances in less time. It accelerated communication, as mounted couriers could relay messages across empires with unprecedented haste. The social structures of entire cultures shifted to accommodate the care, breeding, and mastery of this powerful creature. This pre-modern biological network, a kind of Columbian exchange millennia before Columbus, demonstrates that the ancient knowledge highways were not abstract channels for ideas alone. They were active agents of ecological and social change. The movement of a single species could alter landscapes, redefine diets, and reshape the balance of power between human communities. When we eat a slice of bread, savor a peach, or admire the legacy of equestrian culture, we are tasting and seeing the living legacy of those ancient connections, a testament to how the world was woven together not just by thought, but by the very roots and hoofbeats of life itself. For every idea that found a welcome home, countless others met a wall of silence. The ancient knowledge highways were not a frictionless superhighway, but a treacherous network of mountain passes and guarded gates, where the flow of information could be dammed, diverted, or simply evaporate into the dry air. The first and most deliberate barrier was secrecy. States and guilds fiercely protected the technological advantages that fueled their wealth and power. The Chinese Empire for centuries guarded the complex secrets of sericulture, the art of silk production, with draconian severity. The penalty for smuggling silkworm eggs or mulberry seeds out of the country was death. This was a state-level monopoly on biological knowledge, an attempt to control a global market by bottling a single, precious stream of information. Similarly, the techniques for making Damascus steel or Roman concrete were closely held by artisan families, their methods passed down orally within workshops, not written in books that could be copied and carried away. This protective instinct turned certain forms of knowledge into prisoners of geography. Even when knowledge physically arrived, it faced the more subtle but equally powerful barrier of cultural chauvinism. A new idea, especially one wrapped in foreign philosophy or religious belief, could be seen not as an opportunity, but as a threat to the established order. The reception of Greek science in ancient China is a fascinating case. During the Tang dynasty, Nestorian Christians and other travelers brought advanced Greek astronomical and mathematical concepts east along the Silk Roads. Yet these ideas made limited headway within the Chinese scholarly elite, who operated within a deeply entrenched bureaucratic and cosmological framework of their own. The foreign knowledge was often documented out of curiosity, but it was not integrated into the mainstream imperial system. It was seen as interesting, perhaps, but not fundamentally useful or correct within the local context of understanding. The language of the heavens, it turned out, was spoken with different accents, and not all ears were prepared to listen. Then there was the profound fragility of the media itself. Knowledge in the ancient world lived on borrowed time. It was inscribed on papyrus scrolls that could rot in damp conditions, written on silk that could tear, or entrusted to palm leaves that could be consumed by insects. Most pervasively, it lived in the fragile vessel of human memory, passed along in oral traditions that required meticulous, generation-to-generation discipline to maintain accuracy. A single catastrophe could erase centuries of accumulated thought. The burning of the Library of Alexandria is the most famous symbol of this vulnerability, but it was hardly alone. Countless other repositories, from the palace archives of Assyrian kings to the scriptoria of Buddhist monasteries in India, were lost to fire, flood, war, or simple neglect. When a school of philosophy failed to find a wealthy patron, or when a lineage of masters died without a dedicated student, an entire way of thinking could vanish as completely as a footprint in the desert sand. This constant background hum of loss makes the fragments that did survive, like the Antikythera Mechanism or the translated texts of the House of Wisdom, seem like minor miracles. This perspective is crucial, for it balances our awe at the connections that were made with a sober respect for the difficulty of the task. The ancient global network was patchy, contested, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. A caravan might be robbed, a ship might sink with its scholarly passenger, a translating project might lose its funding, a conservative priestly class might suppress a foreign text. For every Buddhist sutra successfully translated in Dunhuang, there were surely treatises on medicine or mechanics that molded away, unread, in a forgotten tongue in some Oasis storeroom. This very fragility, however, casts the successes in their true, dazzling light. The fact that we can trace the journey of the number 0 from India to Baghdad to Europe, or see Greek artistic style in the Buddhas of Gandhara, is not a historical inevitability. It is the result of 1,000 precarious victories, of individuals who chose to share rather than hoard, of communities that chose to translate rather than ignore, and of fragments that somehow, against all odds, survived the long silence. It reminds us that the history of ideas is not just a story of brilliant creation, but a story of perilous transmission, a fragile flame passed from hand to hand across a very dark and windy plain. And it begs a final, forward-looking question. What does this recovered map of ancient connection mean for us, living in our own age of instant, global information? These manuscripts were not just books, they were living doctrine on the move. To understand the sheer human effort behind the ancient knowledge highways, we can follow a single, profound current, the journey of Buddhist manuscripts from the plains of India to the heart of China. This was not a simple postal delivery, it was a centuries-long migration of an entire worldview, powered by faith and carried on foot. The route itself was a gauntlet. A monk setting out from a Chinese monastery faced the terrifying Taklamakan Desert, whose name in the local tongue translates roughly to the place you go in and never come out. He would then climb the freezing, oxygen-thin passes of the Pamir Mountains, the roof of the world, before finally descending into the intellectual heartland of India. This journey, one way, could take years. The most famous of these pilgrim scholars was Xuanzang, who in the 7th century defied an imperial travel ban, motivated by a desire for pure doctrinal understanding. He spent over a decade in India, studying at the great monastic university of Nalanda, debating with masters and collecting manuscripts. His return caravan did not carry trade goods, but over 600 Sanskrit texts, written on fragile palm leaves and bundled with care. Each of those bundles represented a monumental risk, vulnerable to sandstorms, bandits, and the relentless damp that could make the leaves mold and the ink run. Their safe arrival in the Chinese capital of Chang'an was a triumph of sheer determination. But the physical journey was only the first act. The real work began in the translation bureaus, vast state-sponsored workshops that were the ancient equivalent of a cutting-edge research institute. Here, teams of scholars assembled, each with a specialized role. A master from India or Central Asia would recite and explain the Sanskrit text. A Chinese monk, deeply versed in both Buddhist philosophy and classical Chinese literature, would craft the translation. Scribes would record, and editors would polish the language for clarity and beauty. This was collaborative scholarship on an industrial scale, often overseen by imperial patronage, because translating these texts was seen as an act of cosmic and political importance. The challenge was not merely linguistic, it was conceptual. The Indian Buddhist texts spoke of concepts like sunyata, often translated as emptiness or voidness, a subtle philosophical idea about the nature of reality. To convey this in Chinese, the translators reached for a term from their own native philosophical tradition, the Tao or the Way. This was not a perfect match, but a creative adaptation. They were building a conceptual bridge, using the pillars of Chinese thought to support the architecture of Indian enlightenment. Through this deliberate, thoughtful process, Buddhism did not remain a foreign import. It was Sinicized, woven into the fabric of Chinese culture, giving rise to new schools like Chan, which would later become Zen in Japan. This case study lays bare the full mechanism of the knowledge highway. It required the physical courage of the pilgrim, the financial and political support of the state, the intellectual firepower of diverse scholarly teams, and the creative flexibility of translators acting as cultural ambassadors. The palm leaf manuscript that survived the desert was a vessel, but the knowledge within it only truly took root through a second, even more perilous journey, the journey into a new language and a new mind. A single symbol for nothing changed everything. While pilgrims carried sacred texts, another kind of revolution was traveling the same routes, one written not in philosophical prose but in the silent language of numbers. The decimal positional system, born in India with its groundbreaking symbol for zero, is the invisible bedrock of our modern world, from computer code to stock markets. Its journey from a scholarly innovation in the Gupta period to a global standard is a masterclass in how abstract ideas conquer the world. The system's power was its breathtaking efficiency. Unlike the cumbersome Roman numerals, where calculating MMMCCCLXXXII plus DCCCLXV III was a slow, error-prone chore, the Indian system used just 10 symbols whose value depended on their position. A 3 in the ones column meant 3, but in the tens column it meant 30. This positional logic, combined with a symbol, a dot or a circle, to mark an empty place, unlocked the potential for rapid calculation, including the powerful methods of algebra. This intellectual tool did not walk west on its own. It was carried into the vibrant heart of the Abbasid Caliphate in the 9th century by scholars like Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi. In his seminal work on the calculation with Hindu numerals, he did not merely describe the system, he championed it, demonstrating its superiority for complex astronomical and commercial mathematics. His name, immortalized in the word algorithm, signifies the very process of systematic calculation this system enabled. The Islamic world became the system's great amplifier, refining and propagating it through networks of trade and scholarship that stretched from Cordoba to Samarkand. The final leap into Europe came through the porous intellectual border of Islamic Spain. In the early 13th century, a young Italian merchant named Leonardo of Pisa, later known as Fibonacci, was educated in the bustling North African port of Buja. There he encountered the Hindu-Arabic numerals used by Muslim traders. Recognizing their profound utility, he wrote Liber Abaci, the Book of Calculation, a practical manual that introduced the system to European merchants and scholars through problems involving currency exchange, profit margins, and interest. Yet this superior tool faced stubborn resistance. The old guard, steeped in the tradition of Roman numerals and the abacus, viewed the new numbers with deep suspicion. The symbols seemed strange, and the concept of zero was philosophically troubling, even dangerous to some. How could nothing be something? The very efficiency of the system also threatened the guild of professional calculators, whose skills were rendered obsolete by a method anyone could learn with a pen and parchment. Adoption was a slow battle of practicality over tradition. Merchants and bankers who lived and died by the speed and accuracy of their accounts became the system's grassroots advocates. Its victory was not just technological but cognitive, requiring a fundamental shift in how people thought about quantity and calculation. This journey from India to Baghdad to Florence is the quintessential story of a soft power conquest. No army carried these numerals, no empire mandated their use. They spread because they worked better, traveling along the same routes as spices and silks, propelled by the universal human need for better tools to navigate an increasingly complex world. The global triumph of this Indian invention, filtered through Islamic scholarship and delivered to Europe by a merchant's son, is perhaps the purest evidence we have of the ancient world's interconnected mind. It proves that the most durable cargo on those knowledge highways was often not a physical object, but a pattern of thought, a set of rules so elegant and powerful that it could rewrite the logic of civilization itself. The collision of worlds often leaves its most beautiful scars in art. Centuries after Alexander the Great's armies marched through Central Asia, a quiet, profound revolution was taking shape in the workshops of Gandhara. Here, in the fertile valleys of what is now Pakistan and Afghanistan, a new visual language was being born from the meeting of two distant shores. Greek artisans, or their descendants trained in a Hellenistic tradition, stood before a spiritual challenge: how to give form to the enlightened one, the Buddha, whose teachings had swept north from India. For centuries, Buddhist art had avoided direct human representation, using symbols like a footprint, an empty throne, or the Bodhi tree to signify the Buddha's presence. The Greek artistic mind, however, was steeped in the celebration of the idealized human form. Sculptors in Gandhara began to apply the precise, realistic techniques of their heritage, carving muscular, proportionate bodies with serene, classical faces. They draped these figures in robes that fell in heavy, realistic folds, echoing the wet drapery style of Greek and Roman statues. The result was breathtaking. For the first time in history, the Buddha was given a human face and body, an approachable divinity rendered with Apollonian grace. This was more than artistic borrowing, it was a theological translation, making a profound spiritual concept visually accessible through a familiar, respected aesthetic vocabulary. Look closely at a Gandharan Buddha from the first few centuries of the Common Era. The posture is often the contrapposto stance of a Greek athlete, weight shifted gracefully to one leg. The robe resembles a Roman toga, meticulously carved to show the cloth's weight and texture. Yet the elongated earlobes, the ashnisha or cranial protuberance symbolizing wisdom, and the serene, inward-focused expression are purely Buddhist iconography. This hybrid figure became a powerful new standard. As the artistic style matured, it did not stay put. The very highways that made its creation possible now carried it forward. These elegant, humanized images of the Buddha traveled back along the Silk Road, moving through the oasis towns of Central Asia like Samarkand and Dunhuang, and eventually into the heart of China. The impact was transformative. Earlier Chinese Buddhist art had relied on more abstract, symbolic forms, but the Gandharan model offered a compelling new template, one of compassionate, human-like deities. This influence is visible in the early cave temples of China, where the sculptural style gradually absorbed and adapted these foreign elements, blending them with indigenous artistic sensibilities to create the majestic Buddha figures of the Longmen and Yungang grottos. The journey of this artistic fusion demonstrates that the Silk Road traded in more than commodities. It traded visual grammar, a Greek technique for carving drapery, born from observing linen cling to the body, became a vehicle for expressing the ethereal quality of enlightenment. A Roman garment was reinterpreted as the sacred robe of a monk. This was not a superficial stylistic overlay, but a deep, synthetic creativity where form and faith became inseparable. The Gandharan Buddha stands as a permanent monument to the generative power of cultural crossroads, proving that when two great streams of human expression meet, they can give rise to a third, more powerful current, one that flows across continents and deep into the human spirit. Empires may crumble, but knowledge has a stubborn habit of finding new guardians. As the political unity of Rome and Han China fragmented, the grand, state-sponsored highways of antiquity grew quieter, their stone roads cracking under the weight of neglect and new borders. Yet the light of learning did not flicker out. It simply found new lanterns to carry it through a more fractured age. In the medieval world, two distinct networks emerged as the unexpected custodians of the ancient inheritance: the bustling, cosmopolitan courts of the Islamic caliphates and the silent, candlelit scriptoria of European monasteries. Their work was not about creating new routes, but about preserving the map itself, ensuring the old highways could one day be traveled again. In the east, the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad became the new Alexandria. As we saw earlier, the House of Wisdom was not an isolated miracle, but the pinnacle of a sustained, society-wide project. Islamic scholars did far more than just store Greek, Persian, and Indian texts. They actively engaged with them. They corrected Ptolemy's star charts with their own meticulous observations. They expanded on Galen's medical theories with new clinical insights. They translated Aristotle's logic and Plato's philosophy, weaving them into the fabric of Islamic theology and law. This was not passive preservation, it was dynamic enhancement. A Greek geometrical proof would be annotated in Arabic, then challenged and refined by a Persian mathematician, creating a living, evolving body of science that traveled from Cordoba to Samarkand in a common language. This kept the flame of classical rational inquiry burning brightly for centuries. Meanwhile, on the far western edge of the old Roman world, a different kind of preservation was underway. In isolated monasteries from Ireland to the Italian Alps, Benedictine and Irish monks dedicated their lives to ora et labora, prayer and work. A central part of that holy labor was copying. In unheated scriptoria, monks would spend years meticulously transcribing the few classical texts that had survived the collapse, works by Virgil, Cicero, and the early church fathers. Their focus was often theological, but in copying these works, they inadvertently saved the very language, logic, and historical memory of the classical world. An Irish monk copying a geometry text by Boethius might not have fully grasped its mathematical implications, but his faithful hand ensured the concepts survived the long European winter. These scribes were the unsung archivists of civilization, their quiet dedication forming a fragile, threadbare but unbroken chain linking antiquity to the future. And then there were the connectors, the Vikings, often remembered only for their raids. Their deeper legacy was as network builders of the North. Their sleek longships established trade routes that stretched from the fjords of Norway to the markets of Constantinople, known as Miklagard, and even to the courts of the Abbasid caliphs, where Arabic silver dirhams have been found in Scandinavian hoards. They traded furs, amber, and slaves for silk, glass, and silver, but along with these goods flowed stories, technologies, and perhaps even manuscripts. A Norse trader in Byzantium would have been exposed to the grandeur of a still-living Roman imperial tradition, and the advanced Greek scholarship preserved there. While evidence of direct intellectual transfer is sparse, these Viking corridors created a northern loop in the global network, proving that even in an age of political division, the human impulse to connect and trade, and with it, the potential for knowledge to hitch a ride never fully ceased. The medieval period, then, was not a dark age of disconnect, but an era of patient, often precarious stewardship. The Islamic world actively curated and expanded the ancient library. Monastic Europe faithfully copied its surviving pages, and Viking traders kept distant shores in sporadic conversation. This divided, decentralized work ensured that when conditions changed, when cities grew again and scholars sought the roots of wisdom, the texts and ideas were not lost to myth. The Renaissance, that famous rebirth of art and science, was in many ways a rediscovery of these very highways. It was the moment when Europe, through renewed contact with the Islamic world and the unearthing of its own monastic treasures, suddenly regained the map and began walking the old roads with new eyes. The torch had been kept alight, passed from hand to steady hand across the long bridge of centuries. The digital world we navigate today is not a sudden rupture in history, but a familiar pattern accelerated to light speed. Our global internet, with its vast networks of fiber optic cables and satellite links, is the direct descendant of the Silk Roads and spice routes, a digital knowledge highway operating at near instantaneous velocity. Where a caravan took years, a data packet takes milliseconds, yet the fundamental human impulse remains identical: to connect, to share, and to learn from one another across any distance. We can see the ancient archetypes reborn in our modern tools. The social media influencer, curating a worldview for a distant audience, plays a role not unlike the traveling storyteller or monk who carried myths and philosophies from town to town. The sprawling online database, from academic journals to open access libraries, functions as our decentralized, globalized Library of Alexandria, aiming to collect and preserve the world's information in a single, accessible realm. Even the challenges we face are hauntingly familiar. The persistent issue of misinformation and viral falsehoods mirrors the historical problems of translation errors and context lost as stories traveled. A philosophical concept from Greece, imperfectly rendered into Chinese, could evolve into a new school of thought, just as a fragment of news, stripped of its original context and reshared across a continent, can morph into a modern legend. The ancient highways were never neutral conduits. They spread both magnificent innovation and devastating hardship, carrying groundbreaking mathematics alongside contagious illness. Our digital network behaves with the same duality, capable of democratizing education and mobilizing aid with one hand, while amplifying discord and cultural friction with the other. This perspective is profoundly grounding. It tells us that our current age of overwhelming connectivity and information anxiety is not an unprecedented crisis, but the latest, fastest chapter in a very old story. The scale and speed are new, but the core dynamics of human communication, the struggle between sharing and gatekeeping, between understanding and distortion, between beneficial exchange and harmful spread, are ancient. Recognizing this continuity allows us to view our digital landscape not with naive wonder or paralyzing fear, but with historical insight. We are not the first to build a World Wide Web. We are simply the first to build it with electrons. The lesson from those older, slower networks is clear. The value of the highway is determined not by its existence, but by the wisdom and intention of those who travel it. Mapping these ancient conversations requires listening to whispers in the dust. How do we, in the 21st century, reconstruct the intangible flow of ideas across millennia? We cannot interview a Sogdian merchant or board a Phoenician ship. Instead, we have become detectives of the faintest traces, using an arsenal of modern tools that act as a kind of archaeology of the mind itself. Our first vantage point comes from far above. Satellite imagery and LiDAR, which uses laser pulses to map terrain, are peeling back forests and sand to reveal the ghostly imprint of lost geography. From space, researchers can spot the faint, straight lines of forgotten caravan trails cutting across the Taklamakan Desert, or the geometric outlines of Maya causeways and Angkorian canals hidden beneath jungle canopy. These are the skeletal remains of the highways themselves, visible only from a perspective the ancients could never have imagined. But what about the people who walked them? Here, science performs something akin to time travel through the human body. Isotope analysis reads the chemical signature locked inside ancient teeth and bones. The water and food a person consumes in childhood leaves a distinct isotopic mark based on the local geology. By analyzing these markers in skeletons found far from their expected homeland, scientists can now prove individual stories of long-distance migration. A woman buried in a Roman cemetery in Britain with isotopes matching North Africa becomes direct, personal evidence of a life spent crossing continents. On a broader scale, the study of ancient DNA is rewriting the map of human prehistory. By extracting genetic material from remains, researchers can track the large-scale movements of populations, revealing how waves of farmers, herders, and travelers mingled across Europe, Asia, and beyond. This genetic map provides the demographic backdrop against which the exchange of ideas took place, showing us that people were moving and mixing on a scale that makes cultural exchange not just possible but inevitable. Language itself is an artifact we can excavate. Historical linguists compare modern languages to reconstruct their lost common ancestors, known as proto-languages. By tracing the spread of words for specific technologies, like the wheel or metallurgy, they can map the pathways of innovation. The dispersal of the Indo-European language family, for instance, from India to Iceland, charts a profound ancient migration of people and their associated worldviews, a linguistic echo of a knowledge highway that shaped half the globe. Perhaps most thrilling is our newfound ability to recover voices thought silenced forever. Advanced imaging techniques are allowing us to read the unreadable. Multispectral imaging can detect faded ink on papyrus, revealing lost gospels or classical texts. Most astonishing is the virtual unwrapping of carbonized scrolls from the Roman town of Herculaneum, which were baked solid by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Using high-resolution CT scans and sophisticated software, scholars are now digitally peeling apart these scorched lumps, reading words written by philosophers 2,000 years ago without ever physically touching the page. Each of these tools, from satellites to DNA sequencers to spectral cameras, allows us to connect a different set of dots. They let us see the road, trace the traveler, and finally, read the message they carried. We are no longer relying on a handful of surviving manuscripts or lucky archaeological finds. We are building a cumulative, multi-layered case from pottery styles, crop remains, genetic markers, and linguistic roots. Together, they form an ever-growing body of evidence not for isolated genius, but for a deeply interconnected ancient world, a global conversation whose echoes we are only now learning to hear with perfect clarity. But these recovered connections also cast a long shadow into the present, raising difficult questions with no easy answers. Who truly owns the legacy of a world that spoke so freely across borders? A stunning Buddhist manuscript, painstakingly translated in a Tang Dynasty workshop, might today reside in a museum in London or Paris, acquired during an era of colonial expansion. The artifact itself is a testament to ancient exchange, yet its current location speaks to a much later period of imbalance and appropriation. This is the complex issue of cultural patrimony. When a sculpture from Cambodia or a textile from Peru is displayed thousands of miles from its homeland, who benefits from the story it tells? Is it a celebration of shared human heritage in a global institution, or is it a continuing loss for the community whose ancestors created it, severed from the living context that gives it deepest meaning? There are no simple verdicts here, only an ongoing, necessary conversation about stewardship, respect, and the right of cultures to narrate their own past. The dilemma deepens when we move from physical objects to intangible ideas. Consider the decimal system or the concept of zero. These are foundational pillars of our modern world, yet they originated in a specific time and place in the scholarly circles of ancient India. Does this mean modern India holds a patent on the logic that powers global finance and computing? Of course not. The very essence of these ancient highways was the free flow and adaptation of such concepts. They were gifts to the world, not commodities to be hoarded. To claim exclusive national ownership over an idea that was designed to travel and transform would be to misunderstand history itself. It would be like a river claiming ownership of the water that has already flowed to the sea. Yet, this very history of free exchange now challenges modern systems built on intellectual property. How do we honor the source of an ancient medical technique or agricultural practice, often refined by indigenous knowledge over millennia, while also ensuring its benefits can be shared to address global challenges? It is a tension between rightful acknowledgement and the common good. These ethical questions are not academic exercises, they are the direct, living consequence of understanding our interconnected past. They force us to ask what we value. Do we see these ancient networks as a justification for collecting the world's treasures in a few central vaults, or as a model for a new kind of collaborative guardianship? The past shows us that knowledge grows strongest when it circulates, when it is translated, debated, and built upon by many hands. Perhaps then, our responsibility is not to claim ownership, but to become better stewards and more generous translators in our own time, ensuring that the legacy of these highways leads not to new walls but to wider bridges. History is a story we are still learning how to read. The map of ancient knowledge highways we've traced is not a finished document, but a living draft with entire continents of the past still labeled terra incognita. The most thrilling chapters may still be waiting, locked in sealed cave libraries, buried beneath desert sands, or resting in the silent darkness of the deep sea. Imagine an undiscovered monastic archive in the Himalayas, its clay pots still holding birchbark manuscripts that detail philosophical exchanges between India and Tibet. Picture a major Silk Road caravanserai, untouched for centuries, its storerooms containing the personal letters of a Sogdian merchant family, a trove that could tell us the human stories behind the trade in spices and ideas. Or consider the potential of a deep-sea shipwreck in the Indian Ocean, a wooden hull preserved in the cold, oxygen-poor depths, holding not just amphorae of wine but a captain's logbook, star charts, and perhaps even a small library of texts meant for a distant port. Any one of these finds could rewrite a paragraph, a page, or an entire chapter of our shared human narrative. Our tools for this search are becoming more extraordinary. Beyond the physical dig, researchers are now conducting digital excavations. Computational analysis, often called distant reading, allows scholars to process massive corpora of ancient texts, searching for subtle patterns of word usage, conceptual borrowing, and narrative flow that would be impossible for a single human to detect across centuries of literature. This could reveal, for instance, how a specific metaphor for kingship traveled from a Persian epic into a Chinese court document, or how a medical diagnosis described in Alexandria found its way, with modifications, into a Sanskrit treatise. It is a way of listening to the echo of ideas across vast distances of time and text. Another frontier beckons to the south. While our story has focused on the trans-Eurasian networks, the connections of sub-Saharan Africa to these global currents remain a rich and urgent question. We know trade goods like gold and ivory moved north, but what intellectual and cultural freight traveled with them? The great empires of West Africa, like Mali and Ghana, were centers of learning and commerce. How did the scholarly traditions of Timbuktu engage with the philosophical and scientific currents flowing through the Islamic world? Unraveling these connections will require a new generation of archaeological work and a fresh look at long-overlooked oral histories and material culture. This work demands a spirit of radical collaboration. The future of understanding our connected past lies not in isolated disciplines, but in teams where a historian analyzing a text works alongside a geneticist studying ancient DNA, a climatologist reconstructing past environments, and a data scientist building models of social networks. A single artifact, a coin, a seed, or a skull can now tell multiple interlocking stories about trade, diet, migration, and belief. This interdisciplinary approach reminds us that history is not a static record of facts locked in books. It is an ongoing excavation, a constant conversation with the past where every new discovery, every decoded manuscript, and every mapped gene flow adds another voice to the chorus. The ancient knowledge highways show us that we have always been a species in dialogue. Our task now is to listen more carefully, to widen the circle of that conversation to include every continent and every culture, and to continue the work of those ancient translators and travelers, not by carrying scrolls across deserts, but by piecing together with patience and wonder the magnificent, interconnected mosaic of our collective human journey. Your own mind is a living archive of these ancient conversations. The language forming your thoughts right now carries echoes of forgotten trade routes and scholarly translations. The numbers balancing your budget or measuring your world descend directly from that Indian innovation, filtered through Baghdad and championed by an Italian merchant. The spices in your kitchen, the philosophical concepts that shape your ethics, even the stories you find meaningful, they are all travelers. They have journeyed for centuries, sometimes millennia, changing hands and evolving with each new custodian before arriving here in your consciousness. You are not merely studying history, you are embodying it. You are a living-in point, a unique confluence of countless streams of thought that once flowed across continents on the backs of camels and the hulls of ships. This realization fosters a profound sense of shared heritage. It pulls the rug out from under any notion of cultural purity or isolated genius. No civilization ever built its cathedral of thought from only local materials. The magnificent tapestry of Chinese culture incorporated Buddhist philosophy from India and equestrian technology from the steppes. The intellectual glory of Renaissance Europe was a re-engagement with Greek and Arab scholarship preserved and enhanced by others. The very foundations of Western law, science, and art are hybrid creations, born from the sustained, messy, beautiful collision of different ways of seeing the world. To claim one thread as solely our own is to misunderstand the entire weave of human history. This perspective invites a deep humility. It asks us to look at cultural difference not as a wall, but as a different chapter in the same ongoing story. The stranger's tradition is not alien. It is simply another branch on the vast, interconnected tree of human adaptation and expression, nourished by different soils but reaching for the same sky. When we encounter a belief, an art form, or a custom that seems unfamiliar, we can choose to see it as a threat to our own narrative, or we can choose to see it as a fellow traveler on the ancient highway, carrying its own precious cargo of accumulated wisdom. Understanding this deep connectivity reframes our present moment. The tensions and exchanges of our globalized world are not a break from the past, but an acceleration of a pattern as old as civilization itself. We are still trading ideas, still translating meanings, still struggling with the friction and the fertility that comes when worldviews meet. The difference is that we now do it in real time with the whole world watching. Knowing the long history of this exchange can be a source of hope, not anxiety. It proves our capacity for creative synthesis, for building something new and magnificent from the gifts of many hands. It suggests that our current challenges of coexistence are not insurmountable, but are the latest iteration of a very old, very human project, the project of learning how to listen and how to share the road. The principles that lit those ancient signal fires are not relics, they are a blueprint. We can actively choose to rebuild the connective tissue of our modern world by learning from what worked so well for so long. The first lesson is to champion the translator in every sense of the word. The House of Wisdom did not just store Greek texts, it paid scholars to render them into Arabic, to make them speak a new language. Today, this means valuing interdisciplinary dialogue. When a software engineer collaborates with a poet or a biologist with a historian, they are performing a modern translation. They are building a conceptual bridge between different worlds of knowledge, and as history shows us, the most breathtaking innovations are born on those bridges. We must create and support spaces where this kind of cross-pollination is not an accident but a deliberate practice. The second lesson is about infrastructure, but of a social kind. The Pax Mongolica guaranteed safe passage across continents. Our modern equivalent is the maintenance of open, respectful channels of communication. This means defending the integrity of our shared digital spaces from those who would sow discord to close them down. It means supporting net neutrality so the digital caravan can travel freely. And it means cultivating civic conversations where differing viewpoints can be exchanged without the threat of verbal violence. A safe route, whether made of stone or social agreement, is what allows valuable cargo to move. Third, we must be tireless patrons of the modern knowledge hub. The great libraries, monastic scriptoria, and royal courts that funded scholars were the stable nodes in the network. Today, that translates to supporting public libraries, funding basic scientific research, investing in universities as places of open inquiry, and championing cultural exchange programs. These are not luxuries, they are the essential reservoirs and pumping stations for our global conversation. When we defund them, we are not cutting a budget, we are dismantling a caravanserai and leaving future thinkers with nowhere to rest, refuel, and share their maps. Finally, the most personal lesson: be a curious traveler. You do not need a passport to start this journey. Seek out perspectives from what we might call different cultural continents. Read a novel translated from a language you do not know. Listen to music from a tradition entirely unfamiliar to you. Follow a historian or scientist from another country online. Each of these acts is a small, personal caravan journey, carrying a fragment of understanding from one shore of your mind to another. By consciously applying these ancient principles: openness, investment in soft infrastructure, and deep respect for the translators who build bridges, we do more than honor the past. We actively engineer a more resilient, innovative, and empathetic future. The ancient highways show us that isolation is a choice and connection is a craft. We inherited a world woven together by their efforts, and now it is our turn to do the weaving. Isolation is the great illusion of history. Our journey along these ancient highways reveals a world perpetually in conversation, its ideas flowing as steadily as the monsoon winds or the plodding steps of a camel caravan. The mathematics that calculate a satellite's orbit, the philosophical underpinnings of our ethics, the very stories that give our lives meaning, they are all travelers. They arrived here after epic journeys across deserts and oceans, passed from hand to hand, translated and transformed by countless minds who chose to share rather than hoard. This is the true legacy of those intercontinental networks, a collaborative foundation for our modern world, built stone by intellectual stone from the contributions of cultures we once believed were separate. Progress, it turns out, has always been a team sport played on a global field. As we navigate our own dizzying age of instant connection, we would do well to remember the virtues of those earlier travelers. They moved with a patience we have largely forgotten, understanding that the most valuable insights could not be rushed. They demonstrated a courage to venture into the unknown, not knowing if the next oasis would hold water or hostility. And above all, they carried an insatiable curiosity, a belief that the stranger over the horizon might just hold a piece of a puzzle they themselves were trying to solve. Their story invites us to become better travelers in our own time, to approach the unfamiliar not as a threat, but as a potential teacher carrying a fragment of a much larger truth. If this interconnected vision of our past resonates with you, share this video to spread the idea. Consider subscribing to join us as we continue to trace these threads, unraveling the great mysteries that bind our shared human story. The grand conversation across continents never truly ended. It simply learned to speak at the speed